Aloha, I'm Paul Drews. Welcome back for another edition of PTC TV brought to you by PTC 13 Platinum sponsor Equinix. This is the third of 5 programs specially created for PTC 13. If you missed the first 2 programs, visit ptc.org after the conference to watch the episodes you missed.
Aloha, I am Sharon Nakama, PTC CEO. On a personal note, I would like to acknowledge all of the people who helped make PTC 13 possible. I'm very appreciative to all of our volunteers and staff for their support and willingness to be involved. I am also very grateful to our PTC 13 program co-chairs, Gary Kim, Masaaki Sakamaki, and Joe Weinman, who worked all year long alongside the entire program committee to shape this year's fantastic program. A very special mahalo goes out to all of PTC's amazing members. You are the heart of PTC and have made this organization what it is today. I would like to thank our member-elected Board of Governors and Advisory Council as well as those who serve on the working committees of the Council. A very special mahalo to the PTC 13 sponsors. Thank you to Tata Communications for being the PTC 13 Diamond sponsor. A very special mahalo to each of you. Aloha.
Looking to pick up your registration badge and materials or register for PTC 13? Visit the PTC 13 registration booth located in the Coral Lounge on the 6th floor of the Mid-Pacific Conference Center at the Hilton Hawaiian Village Waikiki Beach Resort. The registration booth is open every day starting at 8 a.m. Please remember to bring a valid form of photo identification with you to claim your registration badge and materials.
Traffic has had some interesting impacts to the mobile ecosystem. First and foremost would be mobile network operators. For the longest time, mobile networks tended to be a single application network, and that was voice. This is very similar to the behavior we saw 14 years ago when public ISPs came together in our facilities in order to peer and localize the exchange of traffic with one another in order to make sure that the internet delivered a positive experience. We're now seeing the same thing from the mobile network operators. There are some interesting secondary effects to other members of the mobile ecosystem for very similar reasons. A good example would be social media platforms and advertising platforms that tend to co-locate next to one another in order to serve content as efficiently and quickly as possible. Another good example would be handset OEMs, who will tend to proxy things such as email and other types of popular content in order to make sure the end user has a positive experience.
Hello, aloha. My name is Tony Chan. I'm editor-at-large at Communications Day, and today I have the honor of sitting with Dr. Jun Murai, who is the Dean and Professor of Environment and Information Studies at Keio University, Japan. Dr. Murai is commonly known as the father of the internet in Japan, so today I'm very enthusiastic in getting his view on what's happening in the internet in Japan and obviously around the world as well. So, Dr. Murai, what do you think of the internet there?
Well, actually, I'm always sitting on an optimistic way to view the internet, and I have a, kind of a technical vision for the future. And so it's always interesting, and I'm very happy with the current status and for the future as well.
Okay, so do you think, how would you compare the internet today compared to when you first found it?
Well, I've been involved on this from the first point, so it's a big difference. But probably the most, interesting change of the early internet and today's internet is the early internet was a kind of technology, digital technology for the global space. Mm-hmm. Today's internet is for human beings on the earth, for everybody, right? That initially that was for researchers, now for everyone, right? So there's a lot of things that changed because of that reason.
Okay. In terms of the kind of services that you're seeing, I mean, in Japan, at least with the mobile phones, it was definitely above, heads and shoulders above everybody else.
Well,
Is it still
yeah,
the same?
exactly. I mean, not only the wireless, infrastructure, but also the optical fiber and broadband infrastructure. Probably Japan is one of the leading countries, and so anything happening, I mean, technically happening on that country is basically the kind of a good example of the futuristic view of broadband in general for wireless and for fixed network. But also the interesting thing, because the change shifting to the use of the internet, right? These days. So Japan is also a leader of the futuristic problems in a country, right? Like the elderly, society and everything. So how the kind of medical and the health relationship applications from the internet can help the society. Disaster management and earthquake, we're expecting earthquake periodically, right? And then what's the role for the entire society from the point of view of the internet is always a kind of also a leading problem countries as well. So that's a very interesting, and then we have a lot to work in Japan.
Okay. So I mean, obviously, when you come up with like elderly users and healthcare, that's some of the visionary kind of applications going forward that I hope Japan is starting to solve today. But what about the rest of the internet when things like the data deluge, like there's so much data that
probably the two major things happening on the internet is one is the video traffic. Video traffic is increasing very high. And in Japanese standard, we just started the standardization of the 4K stream, 8K streams over the IP, over the internet thing. So which is a very huge traffic for the future. We just tested on the London Olympic for the 8K transmission from London to Japan, and then it was successfully done. But a lot of issues in order to deploy to the society, right? So that's video traffic is one of it, and another thing is the IoT. So the last month in CES, I mean Consumer Electronics Show, then the consumer electronic is a product, right? Hardware product, but now it's a part of the internet, right? And then also automobile, a lot of participation on the CES, exhibition, meaning that the automobile is a part of the internet. So it's in general probably it's a broader view of Internet of Things happening. So that's also a very important area from engineering point of view as well, right?
So basically, there's a lot more work to be done.
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have to leave it there. So thank you very much, Dr. Murai.
Okay.
Aloha. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Tony.
Would you like a quick and easy way to keep track of the conference program and schedule? Download the PTC 13 mobile app and favorite the sessions you'd like to attend. Learn about the PTC 13 sponsors and find out where the meeting suites are located. You can do all of this and more. Visit crwd.cc/PTC13 on your mobile device or search for PTC 13 in the App Store. Visit the PTC Pavilion and meet with the PTC 13 exhibitors to learn about the latest in systems, products, and services. The exhibits are located in the PTC Pavilion in Coral Ballrooms 4 and 5 of the Mid-Pacific Conference Center. In addition to the exhibits, the PTC Pavilion also features meeting cubicles, meeting tables, conference luncheons, and more.
It's exciting to be here. When I started thinking about what it might mean to visit the internet about 3 or 4 years ago now, everybody said that there was this mythic place where all of the most important people in telecom gather in shorts and aloha shirts. And that if I wanted to meet the people who ran the internet, this was the place to come. And I didn't make it then. It's only now that I made it, with many thanks to Joe Wyman and Stefan Beckert and others who saw and hoped that I would have something to share with you guys. When the reality is that most of the time what I'm talking about is explaining to people how the internet works, which I'm going to assume is something most of you know. What I'm going to do instead is share a little bit about how I framed what the internet is physically for a lay audience, for an audience of consumers of all kinds, whether a CTO at an enterprise, or whether your wife or mother who is deciding which ISP to buy, and then share a bit about where I think that those sort of demands are going, where I think people are going to ask of their network connection going forward in the future. For me, it's all about this question of how can I touch it physically, and when I started, that was something that seemed almost impossible. This was the image of the internet. If you do a sort of Google image search of the internet, this is all that comes up, or at least until recently, which I'll tell you about. It seemed to be this amorphous blob. It seemed to be something that had no physical reality of its own. You couldn't find yourself on it. It always reminded me a bit of the Apollo image of the blue marble of the Earth, and I think it was similarly meant to make us feel sort of small in the face of this huge expanse. And it was amazing to me, though. I mean, I was ostensibly writing about architecture, about infrastructure, about physical things, but I was spending all of my days sitting at my desk in front of a screen, and the thing that I was connected to didn't exist. It was this fluid, amorphous nothing. There was nothing out there, and you couldn't really go to look for it. There hadn't been anything written essentially since, at least in the lay press, since the telecom boom of a decade ago. When I first mentioned to my editor at Wired that I wanted to write a story about the wires, he said, "Oh my God, we forgot about the wires," and that was the kind of tone, at least among my journalist colleagues, writing primarily about "quote unquote" the internet. And then what changed things for me most dramatically was when this happened one day, when the internet broke and the cable guy came to fix it, and he followed the wire from this dusty clump behind my couch out to the back of my building, and then saw a squirrel running along a cable. And he said, "I think that's your problem. I think a squirrel is chewing on your internet." And this, of course, seemed preposterous, because the internet, as I understood it, was a transcendent idea. It was a set of protocols that had changed the world, had changed dating and revolutions and stock trading and everything you can possibly imagine. It was decidedly not something that squirrels chew on, and yet that, in fact, was the case. A squirrel had, in fact, chewed on my internet. And I got this very clear image in my head of what would happen if I yanked the cable from the wall. Essentially, where would it go? Where would it lead? What would I find there? Who would I find there? All of you. And that's what I did. I started to sort of poke around and ask questions and say, okay, what is this? What is out there? And I quickly felt like a fool, because only fools think the internet actually exists. This is the episode of South Park where the internet breaks, but there's no internet to know if the internet's broken. So they become internet refugees in California, because they hear that's where the internet is, and they do everything they can to sort of get the internet working, and they sort of shoot at it, and they play the Close Encounters of the Third Kind song at it to try to wake it up, but that doesn't work. And instead they go around the back and they unplug it and they plug it back in, and finally the flashing yellow light is steady green. But this embarrassed me, that this was the sort of conventional wisdom about what the internet was, that it wasn't something you could actually go and touch. It was this, again, it was this transcendent idea, not a physical thing. If it wasn't a big thing like that, it was a little thing like this box on the British sitcom, The IT Crowd, where they convinced their colleagues that they've convinced the elders of the internet to lend her, the internet, this box for the afternoon. Normally it lives on the top of Big Ben, of course, because that's where you get the best reception. But instead, she can take it and she can present it and she can say, "This is the internet." And she looks at it and she says, "This is the internet, the whole internet. Is it heavy?" Which is, of course, the question we always ask about the cloud. The cloud is meant to not exist. The term of the cloud suggests that there's nothing out there, that it's weightless. And so for me, it was all a matter of trying to sort of push against this conventional wisdom of the internet not being actually something you can touch. And the only person who seemed to have a clue, the person who seemed to have a sense of what the internet actually was, at least before I met all of you, was Senator Ted Stevens from Alaska, who famously said in 2006 that the internet is not a big truck, it's a series of tubes. And this, again, was hilarious, right? This became the sort of ultimate meme about what the internet actually is. We all sort of laughed at him because he was stuck in this old way of seeing the world. He hadn't realized that we had moved on to this weightless world of protocols and clouds and transcendent ideas about communication, not stuck in the old world of pipes that connect one place to another, or more accurately, tubes. But in fact, this became the sort of key way for me to frame it, to think about what is it physically. Speaking in technical terms, I would often tell network engineers that I was interested in layer 0 to layer 2.5. And in fact, that was sort of a big part of what I was trying to do. I was trying to say, if the logical, the sort of world of algorithms and protocols and you know, this other was inscrutable to me and inscrutable to so many of us, there was another world that could be focused on, which is the physical, meaning what the machines are, what the internet is actually made of, and the geographic, where it is. And that brought me to a place like this. This is a fiber optic regeneration hut in Kansas. And actually this photograph was taken for a photo essay for Wired. That was the sort of first entree for me into the topic. And it came out of a conversation with a marketing person at the time, Global Crossing, saying, so is there like a hut in the middle of the country that regenerates the signal? She said yes. And then we got on the phone a guy with a pickup truck in Kansas City responsible for maintaining all the fiber optic regeneration huts in a 500-mile radius, and proceeded to have this very surreal conversation about which of those fiber optic huts was the most beautiful. And it turns out that this is the one. But it was amazing to me to begin to recognize that it followed the old paths, that it wasn't this totally virtual thing, but in fact had a lot of weight and was really about these very physical places. And that also meant that I had to sort of both reduce my time scale. I had to say that just because it passes through, a signal passes through this place, it's sort of an infinitesimal fraction of a second, doesn't mean that it's actually there. Doesn't mean that this isn't a legitimate place of the internet. And so once I sort of understood that and realized that this could be framed as both a physical, what it's made of, and geographic, where it is, I started to think about sort of what those other pieces were. And I ended up thinking about the internet essentially as in 3 different categories. I thought of it as the internet exchange points, the places where networks meet. This being 60 Hudson in New York, of course. One of what I started to call about a dozen of the buildings in the world where more networks meet than any place else. And when you tell an audience of people who have never heard this before, they think that's remarkable. It doesn't register that one network has to physically connect to another. And it's even more surprising that that happens in such a short list of places. In in New York and Ashburn, in Telehouse in London, at D-Kicks, at Am6, or at One Wilshire in Los Angeles. And so that became one category, in some ways the most important category of places, these internet exchange points. The second category, of course, are the lines in between, the kind of undersea cables, which I always describe as the kind of most poetic pieces of the internet. This also came from that Wired photo essay. This is Hibernia Atlantic's manhole near Halifax, which came out of a conversation that went something like, when a cable lands on the shore, is there a manhole? Yes. Okay, which is the most beautiful manhole? And it turned out to be this one, a great spot near Halifax. In the third category, and in some ways the one that required the kind of most subtlety of saying this is and this isn't of what I'm talking about in terms of a data center, was saying that a data center is a place where data is processed and stored, and drawing a somewhat fuzzy line between places focused on connectivity, like 60 Hudson or like Ashburn or like Telehouse, and places focused on storage and processing. This being Facebook's data center in Prineville, Oregon, which I also recognized and which I think people began to really appreciate as a place that sort of monumentalizes the physical infrastructure of the internet. I approached this as an architecture writer originally, and a lot of architecture writers said, well, which of these buildings have architecture with a kind of capital A? And it's a short list. It's a short list of places that decide to say with their building, to sort of express their ideals with their building. But I think that's changing. I usually say this, as well as Telehouse's new building in London that has the pixels on the outside, as buildings that sort of express ideals through their facades and through what goes on inside. So if there's a way of then helping people understand what the internet is by thinking about it in physical terms, what happens next is quite surprising, because people start asking a lot of questions. They say, okay, what about security? What's going on here? Why haven't we heard about this before? What's keeping us from that? And one of the things that was most striking to me was that really the internet has now become, but for all of us, the most dominant means of communication. Often the only pipe into our house, the only thing that has to work if we're going to keep our ties with everybody else. And yet, the way in which it's entirely opaque. It's often very difficult to sort of see, beneath the veneer of the brand name or the little service bar on the top of our cell phone and understand what's going on. And that's quite striking compared to so much else in our lives. When I started to think about this, I realized that from the perspective of metrics, from the sort of ability we have to understand the world around us through our devices, there's a sort of endless number of ways that we can do that. Whether it's the altitude of my flight. This is information that is sort of now commonly communicated, but it's instantaneous. The exact location. How many minutes the subway is coming. When the thunderstorm is starting. And yet, with the internet, when you get to that metric of a speed test, it's this sort of blunt instrument. You can't really have a sense about what that means. People don't know how to read that. Trace routes are somewhat, trace routes are kind of an expert level tool. And yet, my sense is, people want to know more. Why can't we know more? Most of us access the internet from sort of fixed places, from home or the office. Most of us spend the majority of our time on a short list of sites. And yet, the connections between those sites, whether it's the peering links or whether it's the traffic congestion on those links, are unspoken. I see some of the chatter on the on the Nanog mailing list. I hear about it in different ways through network engineers, and yet for consumers, it's not there. There isn't a way to sort of check the status of your flight for the internet. That might sound completely bizarre and heretical, but when you're watching a Netflix movie at home and it doesn't work, you want to know what's going on. You want to know just as the bus is going to be late. And I think that's the kind of direction we're going in, towards more metrics that allow us to see deeper into the network and understand what's going on behind the scenes. And I heard that from people in their questions. How can I look this up? How can I know this? And there aren't really tools that people want. And I don't just mean that for people at home, but I mean that for an enterprise level customer who might be provisioning services for a law firm of 5,000 people. I think the direction is towards more of this kind of measurement. The sort of second category of things is more political. This is not about infrastructure, but when this, and it turned out to not be entirely true, but there was this recent hubbub when Instagram announced that they were now potentially selling your photos. This sort of chattering classes erupted and said, "What are you talking about? These are our photos. You can't do that." And there was this quite believable sort of story that went around that they lost 25% of their users in a day. And the reason it was believable is because it seemed as if we are entrusting so much to the cloud. We are so dependent on these services, and yet the terms of service, technically speaking, are again incredibly opaque. They're very difficult to understand. Nobody reads them, and yet I think there's a kind of almost Whole Foods effect that's going to happen. I think that people are, as we become increasingly dependent on these services, they're going to care more about the sort of politics and provenance of where these services are coming from. That there's a sense that these things matter in a way that they might not have before when the phone was the phone company. And I think that's a way that there's a sort of opportunity there as well to kind of open up a bit more and say, this is what we're made of. This is our metal as a company. And again, it cuts across many different customer bases. You might see it now sort of in a business-to-business sense, but I think it will begin to bubble up. When you look at the statistics about how many people hate their cable companies in the US, you recognize that there's a huge opportunity for these companies to be friendlier. There's a huge opportunity for us to know more about where our internet comes from, which comes out of recognizing the sort of basic idea that the internet has parts and pieces, that it's not this amorphous blob. And finally, the third thing, if the first is metrics and the third is sort of politics, the second is politics, the third thing that I think is going to change is more transparency. When I started to think about visiting the internet, this was the Google Maps view of Google's data center at the Dalles. It's about 2009. The picture is not, it's not an old picture, it's obscured. It's sort of a bad Photoshop job of rubbing out their own data center. Over time, that has changed. It now looks more like this, and it's sort of politely labeled. But one of the things that was striking to me is that this is, Google's data centers are the place that are, for many people, this is where the internet is. This is where most of their stuff is. This is their main access point. And yet, for example, when I visited there, I got no sense, at least from Google, that was a relevant question. It was particularly striking because I visited this place at sort of the end of my journey after visiting dozens of other data centers where network engineers had unfailingly said, yes, we understand that people want to know more about this. We're happy to tell you about it. At Google, I was treated to a bit of a tour of the parking lot, and then was served this lunch and told how much everybody likes working at Google. And it was quite striking to me because it was as if the company that knows the most about us was the one that was least willing to engage with our own interest, with the sense that we want to know something about them. We want to know where our internet comes from and what its parts and pieces are. Of course, that changed this fall quite gratifyingly. Google sort of opened up. There had never been an image of a Google data center, and suddenly it was big news when Google announced, and I think in around October, with a big story in Wired, and a sort of sense, this is where your stuff lives, and these beautiful photographs. And what's so striking to me is that this immediately replaced the amorphous blob as the iconic image of the internet. No longer was it something that was just this thing that was more about ideas than about physical things. Suddenly Google said, this is where we are, this is what it is. And Google being Google, that had a very powerful effect. And I think it's that kind of transparency that's going to begin to become more important. You kind of, you have to sort of open up your slaughterhouses. You kind of have to, share a bit about what's happening there. And I've seen that trend as I've been making inquiries and trying to visit places of the internet over the last few years. More and more people have sort of abandoned this kind of Fight Club attitude of, the first rule of data centers is don't talk about data centers, and instead have said, yes, this is an important part of our business. The security concerns are surmountable. We're happy to show this off. And for that to come from Google was a major shift. And then, of course, when you see a picture like this, also from Google, it's quite clear what it looks like, that this is tubes. You sort of recognize that this is, in fact, an incredibly physical thing. And so it's been surprising for me to the degree to which people are curious about this, the degree to which they want to know where their internet comes from. Globally, the book is now going to be translated into 9 languages, including Chinese, Japanese, and Russian. And so that sort of trend towards transparency and knowing what these parts and pieces are, I think becomes an opportunity for all of you. Because my hunch is that the spotlight is going to continue to grow. And you can put it in positive terms, you can put it in negative terms, but it's sort of hard time to kind of get your house in order in terms of that. So I think that might sound a little strange to many of you, but I hope that resonates. It's been a fascinating journey for me to visit all these places. And one of the most important things for me is how welcoming so many of you were in sort of opening up the pieces that you shared. So thank you.
PTC 13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC 13 sponsors. Mahalo to the PTC 13 Diamond sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. Join us for the Tuesday evening reception sponsored by PTC 13 Diamond sponsor Tata Communications. All full conference delegates and delegates holding a one-day registration pass for Tuesday are invited to attend the Tuesday evening reception. The reception starts at 6:30 p.m. and will take place at the Super Pool at the Hilton Hawaiian Village Waikiki Beach Resort. A valid badge is required to attend the Tuesday evening reception, so please remember to bring your badge with you. If you would like to bring a guest, make sure your guest has a guest ticket. Guest tickets will be available for purchase at the door for $85. PTC TV is brought to you by PTC 13 Platinum sponsor Equinix. Mahalo Equinix. Thank you for supporting PTC TV. Time now for a keynote panel discussion, and today's topic is carriers, competition, and the cloud.
Good morning, everyone. Some of you have asked, why do I have 2 speaker badges on? The reason is this is considered stereo. All right, yeah, thank you for laughing. So we have a great panel coming up right now that we're going to cover something that is a major topic for the conference concerning the cloud and its impact on carriers and this emerging world of competition. So there's actually a few sessions today that are pretty exciting on this, and it goes with the theme of the conference, which is capacity, capability, and collaboration. And so the idea is that traditionally, of course, the conference began more as a capacity event, things like bandwidth and routes and things like that. And then as the industry has matured, we've moved into capabilities, whether it's things like portals or flexible provisioning or SDN. And then collaboration is intended to be a catch-all term, which really focuses on a few major things, which includes value-added services like collaboration services in the cloud and so forth, but also this notion of collaboration and perhaps in some cases co-opetition between the traditional providers as well as the emerging over-the-top players, and how we'll all sort of learn to love and live together in peace and hopefully take advantage of an expanding market. So I have a distinguished panel, and I think they should be ready to come out on stage now. So please join me in welcoming the distinguished panel, and we'll do introductions shortly. Okay, so from your right to my left, we've got Raju, Rakesh, Chandra, and Nathan, representing a broad variety of the Pacific Rim countries. And I think maybe the best way to start is by asking each of them a little bit about their current business and their current strategy and their approach to the cloud market. So, Raju, why don't I start with you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm chairman of SIFI Technologies, and I'm also an executive entrepreneur coming from Silicon Valley, living in this country for 30 years. So SIFI is the pioneer of internet service provider, the first private internet service provider in India. And then we also launched the first MPLS network in India, and also we launched the first Tier 3 data center in India. Now the SIFI is the carrier neutral biggest ICT player, and we see the opportunities going from the cloud, going across from the infrastructure to the platforms and the software services. We see a big opportunity for the cloud across India as India is evolving into more economic trend.
Rakesh?
I'm chairman and managing director of BSNL. BSNL is the incumbent telecom service provider in the country, India, and we are one of the largest. We have about 38,000 digital telephone exchanges spread across length and breadth of the country. We have 700,000 route kilometers of optical fiber cable, and we have very strong internet infrastructure in the country. In fact, we are the market leader in India in terms of broadband market. We have more than 65% broadband market, and we have about 10 million broadband customers. So we feel that with such a strong internet infrastructure in place, we are well positioned to take advantage of the advent of cloud computing and cloud-based services and take it to the masses.
My name is Chandra Pandey. I work for a company called BTI Systems. My company is definitely looking at what is happening on the cloud side, what is required, what kind of the network is required to deliver the services from the cloud. Cloud-based services delivery is totally different than what used to happen before. That's where I come in. I joined the company almost a year back, and I put together a team defining the network infrastructure, what is needed, and doing the product to deliver the services from the network. That's my focus. My company has been working with a lot of the biggest cloud provider in the world right now. So we have learned a lot from them, what they require, and same time, all those learning plus looking into the future point of view, what is needed to deliver the services from the cloud to deliver the user experience. Because it's really critical that you don't just host the service in the cloud, but what kind of the user experience you deliver. Cloud is like a real thing. And what it means by real is there are resources sitting around there, and there is a certain way of delivering the services. If you are not careful, you figure out that there will be service outage. And then all the hype and the excitement we have about cloud will disappear. We do not want that to happen. And that's what my focus is. And I definitely work with some of the biggest cloud provider in the world, learning from them and working collaboratively. Means we are collaborating with them to deliver that user experience. Because at the end, it's a service delivery. That's what matters. It's not that how much servers, storage, and the network you got. It's what you deliver through that. That's what matters. And that's what my focus is.
Nathan, thank you. So great to be here. Thank you very much to Joe and PTC. So I am the Director of Portfolio Marketing for Telstra Global, which I often like to refer to as the world's biggest startup. And what I mean by that is we have had a heritage of data and voice for more than 30 years, but we are only just getting into managed services, which is, I guess, exciting and challenging at the same time. On the one hand, it's quite challenging because you see all these other great service providers out there that are delivering a broad range of managed services. But for us, as Telstra Global, it's given us a great opportunity to see how we can blend the network and cloud computing coming together, not just as services, but actually as platforms. Because everything we're doing is trying to see how do we maximize those two key assets of whether it be the submarine cable systems that we own and or manage, or the data centers, but it's very much how do we sort of take these to the next level and move everything into that sort of cloud environment, providing on an end-to-end basis for our customers.
So it's an interesting mix in terms of the perspectives that you offer, right? Because you've got an incumbent, you've got a startup within an incumbent, and you've got an enabler. So maybe let's start with you, Nathan, on what you just said. So as far as your unit's responsibility within the larger Telstra, how does that strategic conflict or opportunity actually work out? How does that startup within a larger enterprise actually work, and are the goals aligned or conflicted or what?
Very interesting question.
That's why I'm the moderator.
Clearly, yes. So it's a quite interesting dynamic. We are sort of regarded as the thought challenges, I guess, within the broader Telstra Corporation. It's quite exciting for Telstra to be able to have a division that can actually go and try and identify new opportunities. So one of the things we've actually been doing is working with a number of sort of startup companies that are in the cloud space that are testing cloud technologies, whether that be in a contact center environment or security or broader communications, that an incumbent might not normally want to associate themselves with, because for an incumbent in a domestic market, it's, all right, who are my top 3 key suppliers and how am I going to work with them and provide more of a solid base? Whereas what we're trying to do is push the boundaries of some of those services. So we've got this healthy tension, I guess you can call it, of trying to be able to manage the requirements of Telstra as a broader corporation, but then also trying to give us the flexibility of trying out new things. Because a great thing we're trying to do is how do we bring that innovation back into Australia? And when you're dealing with millions of customers, a great way to do that is actually have a division just to the side of that, that's having that flexibility where your customers understand that they are on the cutting edge of some of those new developments.
So, Chandra, you mentioned that there were some interesting lessons that you were trying to pull from the largest providers. What would you say are the 2 or 3 things that really have struck you as being, just amazing developments or capabilities that you're trying to bring into your capabilities and product offers?
Yeah, so as Nathan pointed out, when you go towards the cloud, the set of the network requirement is not your traditional how you did your optical as well as routers, switches, and security gears. The innovation you need to deliver the services from cloud, first of all, it's you have to innovate at a very fast cliff, but at the same time, the innovation requires the convergence. And what it means is you do not want to be having unnecessary set of the layer and complicate the things. And that enables enable the efficiency in your HPC, high performance compute, as well as getting your content or services down to the users. So it's really critical that when you are designing or innovating next set of the networking gears, you tie that directly with the applications. If you don't tie that with the application, because think of this, network is not a service. Service being delivered over the network is the application. So tying the applications with the network, with the minimum layer of complexity, not having too many gears sitting in there, there is a dedicated gear for the routing, switching, then optical switching. Same time is going across the network. You want to have minimum layer of complexity to reduce your latencies. Because at the end, the customer cares about is how much of the infrastructure is needed on one side and what the service get delivered on the other side. So innovation is the key. And that innovation needed is as Nathan pointed out, at the fast cliff. And those things, as soon you can do that in the big organizations, but at the same time, you need the nimble organization, which is making the decision and moving at a very fast cliff and delivering the solution to the service provider, but getting their feedback. Does it work? If it doesn't work, go back and come back with the fast turnaround and enable them to deliver the services. That's what matters.
So in terms of innovation, maybe Raju and Rakesh, we could talk a little bit about, you're operating in pretty broadly within the Southeast Asia region, and obviously Rakesh, you're operating in India very effectively. And so the question would be, is there anything, talking about innovation, you've leapfrogged maybe several generations and really jumped right to mobile. So what are the implications in terms of any regional differences that you're seeing, any differences maybe by market segment, or anything else in terms of how local market conditions may be playing into your overall strategy?
Yeah, Joe, the innovations, see, the way I look at it is cloud, it's not a technology disruption. It's more of, all the cloud technology, built by, large enterprises, and it's available. In my mind, the cloud is a disruption for the market and the business, the process. So the way we look at it is a country like in India, we have road cuts and fiber cuts and the power, shortage of the power. But, when you're coming to the cloud, there is no excuses. See, that is what cloud does is, you have to be on the service all the time. That means if you look at it in IT, the way I look at it is coming from an IT background, carriers has to act like an IT players, and they have to reinvent themselves before the technology obsolescence. The important things like we attention in the IT, the performance. Performance, when we design a chip or design a system, we don't look at providing 10 meg to 20 meg or a couple more T1 lines. Each generation we go for a performance and we do against a benchmark. Is it we are providing a service to meeting the benchmark? Second is time to market. Time to market, in a careers, I'm attending this conference for last several years and engaging with a lot of the people. It's more of it's more of how many links and where we are doing analyze, those kind of things. But if you're looking at in the cloud, beyond that, you need to provide, there is a certain ways goes into the cloud. You're entering into the IT. domain. And the third is you are looking at a performance and the time to market, and these are the very, very important, and the scaling and the speed and the quality of the service. The important thing you want to provide is the first world-class solution in a third world environment. It's very, very important. That is where I see the innovations going into the cloud for a carriers. So I think there is a lot of opportunities in the cloud. At the end of the day, it's a lot of cooperation, and there is no one service provider can provide the complete stack. And we have a lot of assets, and we have to be collaborate. It's not one success. It's all we have to be work ourselves and leverage other people in investments. And that is what I look at is a lot of innovations has to be go in this platform.
Rakesh, care to add?
Yeah, as I mentioned, India being a very large country, and government embarking upon large projects to take data services down to the bottom of the pyramid. We are laying about 500,000 route kilometers of optical fiber cable to access all the 250,000 village panchayats. So all this is going to bring a large amount of data services being made available. Coupled with that, the situation as it prevails in the country vis-a-vis power and other things, it's very critical that these data services are provided with minimum downtime. A company like BSNL, a telecom service provider like BSNL, is ideally equipped to bring the advantages of cloud services to these vast population. Also, in India, we have a very large small and medium enterprise segment who on their own are not able to, rather it's uneconomical for them if they go for intricate IT solutions on their own. So I see cloud provides a big opportunity for them also to leverage the advantages of IT in furtherance of their business. And companies like BSNL are ideally suited to bring these cloud services in collaboration with system integrators and cloud providers to this large segment of small, medium, and micro enterprises, and increase in their business and the wealth creation.
So I'm going to actually, if I can, come back to that theme in a second. I just want to relate. I see Stefan Beckert in the audience, and Telegeography did a deep dive yesterday on everything from pricing trends to traffic growth and everything else. And to sum up an hour and a half of in-depth presentations, it's something that we sort of all know, which is that the revenue picture for traditional carrier services is not exactly exploding wildly. And so I guess the question would be to everyone on the panel, first of all, what are the implications for that in terms of if carrier revenues are essentially flat and or growth is slowing and the cloud represents the next great revenue opportunity, what is your strategy really with respect to that? And so to return to you, Rakesh, particularly in the mobile end, the challenge with the mobile providers, of course, has always been that the walled garden concept worked well for a couple, 3 years, and then now you have app stores and everything else. So what is the trick, if there is any, to monetizing the mobile cloud opportunity if you're a mobile carrier, and how do you make it all work? So it's a challenging question, but hopefully you can provide some insight.
No, it's true that revenues of telecom service providers in India are under threat. I don't know about other countries, but in India, being a hyper competitive scenario, the revenues of almost all the telecom service providers are under threat. So therefore, the voice revenues, especially the voice revenues, are falling. So all of them are looking towards data services, and then looking toward data services means all of them are trying to embrace the cloud services, right? So in addition to all other compulsions, the compulsion of revenue also is forcing carriers to go towards cloud services. And clearly they have to evolve new business models. The traditional business models are, thinking that they have to compete with the cloud providers is no more valid in the Indian scenario. So it's a kind of collaboration which is happening between cloud service providers and telecom service providers. Like our own company BSNL, very recently we embarked upon, we established about 10 data centers, okay, all over the country in partnership with established data center service providers. We have already launched cloud services from these data centers. So telecom service providers and cloud providers, instead of competing, they are now collaborating, and I see the clear roadmap ahead that they have to collaborate for augmenting their falling revenue streams. Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in with what the pot of gold at the end of the strategic rainbow is, or might be?
Wouldn't it be great if there was a trick? I'd be selling it to everybody in the room and I'd be really rich, but that's never going to happen.
So there's no trick?
I don't think there is, but I also think it's quite interesting that we used to have this, we used to be very comfortable with the term carrier, right, that we were all carriers. But I mean, Rakesh, even you mentioned as a service provider, and I think that just represents the change that our businesses have gone through from being just traditional carriers and being quite comfortable with data and voice, and then knowing that we've had to evolve to add more value to our customers and hence deliver more services. And I actually think that the cloud is just that enabler to that next stage. I think service providers will just continue to evolve. I think that that's just in the nature of who we are and what we do. And I think it's a very exciting time, and I love that point about this collaboration between cloud providers and service providers, but it's very much an ecosystem. We have an ecosystem of application providers, of over-the-top players, of network providers, of data center providers, however you want to define it, but it's that ecosystem where everyone is now having to come together to define, right, what are these new rules of the game? How are we going to work together and define who's going to be accountable and responsible for different elements? So I would love if there was a trick, but I think it's just a fact that we need to continue to evolve what our capabilities are and who we're trying to serve.
Well, if there is a trick, it would seem to me to be that if you're an incumbent carrier and you have the opportunity to provide some sort of performance, response time, latency advantage through the deployment of a distributed fabric, as you were talking about, of data centers that are really on net, tied into that immense backhaul network that you have, then you could kind of create the foundation for this ecosystem for third-party players to come in and be advantaged, right? And so the SaaS providers are used to thinking about the network as just a utility resource that, from an end-to-end arguments basis, just says, the stupider the network, then the better it is in terms of enabling ubiquitous connectivity. But the reverse argument to that would be that with some network intelligence and flexibility and visibility and controllability, like a SDN type of concept in its broadest sense might enable, that you actually could provide differential value that would be monetizable. So do any of you see that as being something that you're working on, that it's kind of, rather than just being a vanilla provider to everyone that comes, creating some sort of differentiated service capability?
I don't think just a vanilla provider is going to be successful. It's going to be more application awareness. So carriers, it's not just providing the links, and understanding the application awareness is very, very important to provide as a cloud. In my mind, cloud is more of a cooperative venture. It's not just a telecom provider or a service cloud provider. It is there is enough pie to all contribute, and also at the same time, everybody can take a leverage of other people's investments. And people has to, aware applications and how the applications behave and the network tuning. Not just, if you look at the way it's cloud, it's not just building a couple of the data centers. Building a couple of data centers, it's like and it's like a central. It's not the way what happened in the distributed computing. If we are thinking, if the supercomputers could have done all the computing, I don't think IT would have been transformed like what it is. The way the PC industry evolved, giving the PC enabled to every person, that's what made the PC industry very successful. Similarly, the way I look at the cloud, having access to every end user and the mass market, like Mr. Upadhyay mentioned, having access to a lot of the people, that's where I see the cloud is going to be successful once it's accessible to such mass production.
Anyone else care to comment?
So I think as Joe pointed out, as well as Mr. Rakesh and Raju pointed out, and Nathan as well, that the way we see it, and it's kind of happening also, is like you have to become a differentiator. You have to tie up with the application. And at the end, what you are delivering from the cloud is a service. It's like application. And that's where basically is like, if you see the revenue stream is kind of shifting from being like people paying for the network is now seen as a small piece of that. It's basically the application, what you are getting out of it. And as Joe pointed out, you go more on the mobile side, as well as like tablets and everything coming in there. What the people care about is like their services are getting delivered. How it get delivered doesn't matter at all. So there is an ecosystem, and that ecosystem requires set of the infrastructure, how you build it. As Mr. Rakesh was pointing out that, hey, now there is a lot of consolidation from the data center is going on. So you consolidate, but you make a bigger data center. But at the same time, like how you kind of like host the services across them and making sure doing the services like delivery from there is at the optimum cost and deliver the optimum user experience. And that's where Joe was pointing out that bringing this like a fabric of like whatever you want to call is network operating systems, which is tied directly into the application. So that way you can differentiate and you know that this service has been delivered and you have met certain set of the SLA. Because without those, you cannot go and charge the people that, you got a service. So that's the differentiation. Applications, network fabric coming together to like deliver that user experience and which you can measure and monitor, and then only you can go and like charge for extra set of the revenues there. And that will be like the innovations for the service provider, because service providers have to keep on innovating. It's like voice is gone. Similarly, data is going away. It's like you can't charge a lot for data. What you are going to charge for? There has to be like next set of the innovation which is coming in the industry.
The traditional challenge with the argument is the issue around, of course, we'd like as providers to offer value-added services that customers want to pay for. They don't always want to pay for that value add, right? So their perception may not be identical. So it's, I think, a challenge for the industry. We have a couple of minutes left. If there's a question from the audience, we'll be happy to entertain it. I can't really see, so yeah, there's one. Yes, Lou. So the question was, as value moves up the stack, there's a lot of over-the-top players that are capturing a lot of value, and how do we compete effectively with them or collaborate with them? And our time is up, so kind of maybe one answer to that from someone.
I think in this collaborative work, there is a value. There is a food chain, and there is certainly people. If you look at the cloud, there is infrastructure layer, the platform side, and the software side. So there is always, I see the potential for a lot of players to contribute, but everybody has to, reinvent themselves to move up. What happened in the same thing in the PC industry, food chain, people doing the chips, people doing the systems. The same thing is going to happen in the, any business. But everybody has evolved, reinvent themselves to go to the next level, to be in this entrepreneurship.
All right, thank you very much. Great panel, and please join me in thanking them for great insights.
Now more than ever, Broadband is life. It's the modern heartbeat that connects our world. And like our own heartbeat, we take it for granted that it'll always be there until the day it's not. Too much is at stake for businesses to rely upon old technologies trying to catch up with today's broadband explosion. Ciena is different. We expected the inevitable and designed fiber optic networks that could handle it. The Ciena GeoMesh unifies terrestrial and submarine networks like never before. It's intelligent, self-aware, and self-healing. When submarine cables get cut or terrestrial links are damaged, the system automatically reroutes communications in milliseconds. So if Ciena's GeoMesh can keep connectivity working at the worst of times, just imagine how well it performs at the best of times. With demand for broadband increasing by 40% a year and submarine cables quickly approaching terabit carrying capacities, businesses need global networks they can trust to handle their skyrocketing challenges. Our streamlined network delivers faster speeds, reduced latency, and fewer points of connectivity to manage and worry about. It all adds up to improved performance, lower operating costs, and greater cooperation. It's no wonder that Ciena has become a dominant player in the submarine network market in just a few years. And when you consider that a submarine cable is severed once every 3 days, or that a terrestrial cable is damaged every 30 minutes, an intelligent, self-healing network is critical. However, the greatest threat isn't a natural or man-made disaster. It's becoming one of these guys, being left behind because demand outstripped performance. Broadband is life. Make sure you have the most innovative network, the smartest people, and the most advanced technology working for you. Ciena's GeoMesh. Undersea, over land, networks unite.
PTC 13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC 13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC 13 Platinum sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
Good morning. I'm John Kriswicki. I'm a partner at Analysis Mason, a consulting firm with offices in 12 offices around the world, including here in the U.S. as well as primarily in Europe. I'm speaking with Jared Appleby, the COO of CoreSite. Jared, good to have you here. And why don't you give us a little history and a little background on where you've seen the data center market evolving over time and how it interrelates with the large carrier concerns?
Well, it's good to see you, John. Yeah, this is probably my 10th year here. It's great to see the evolution of the conference as it's moved from, voice and the networking community, but really adopted now the cloud community. So we're really seeing that in the business as well, and CoreSite's in the center of all that with our data centers that are out there distributed across North America. We're in 10 markets today, and you really see the relevance here with this global community and the role of the network and data center world.
Good. Can you tell us about your mesh product? That's one of your exciting new things that you're doing.
Yeah, the company's been around 13 years, grew up as a real estate company with the Carlyle Group. About 2 years ago, we went IPO and really put at the center of it network-centric computing. The cloud and network community coming together. On Friday, we actually launched our new brand, all around the community, the power of the mesh, as we call it, for CoreSite, which is really putting data center networking at the center of architecture and enabling you to really leverage data center networking into the cloud community. So that's the foundation, the mesh, and it's really our latest announcement from last week.
Where are you seeing the large carriers going with their data center needs as the internet continues to explode, as there's more and more video content and therefore a tremendous amount more bits cruising the undersea cables in the world?
Well, we're really seeing an evolution. I think there's some companies that were really built to scale the internet. Video and particularly cloud computing is changing that, and that's one of the things we're excited at CoreSite is building out these cloud-enabled data center campuses to support the requirements of all the large bandwidth requirements and application performance, sensitive performance kinds of applications that need to be near the edge. So folks are really moving to what we call distributed architectures at the edge and close to end users and to the community who are buyers to get better performance out of their applications and out of their networking needs.
Certainly one of the areas that's exploding is Latin America, and there's a new cable, the CBRAS cable by the Seaborn folks. I just saw a press release from you, I guess, in the past week saying that you are going to be doing a variety of things with them. Would you like to explain that and maybe suggest how that moves your business model along?
Yeah, we talk a lot about these campuses that are, and it really started a few years ago when Unity came over and landed in LA, and they directly connected into the One Wilshire and LA campus. Mm-hmm. And that really was a new way of providing cloud and digital content. That's what we announced on Friday with Seaborn. With CBRAS coming up, where are they going to land? Well, we're bringing them right from their landing site into our new Secaucus facility, which is a 10-acre, 280,000 square foot center that will be up, in the end of third quarter, early fourth quarter. And they're landing there and then distributing from there back into New York and other places in New Jersey. So you get the high performance right to Brazil, and you're seeing this to support the cloud networking and digital content world today.
As the world's evolving, there's certain providers like Google, like Amazon, that control a tremendous amount of bits. But then there are a great many people, such as enterprises or carriers themselves, which have data center needs that are evolving. We're certainly seeing the Googles of the world building significant amounts of data center capacity abroad to reduce their costs, to engage in caching, to bring content closer to the locals, for instance in Brazil, for instance in Europe. Where do you see you fitting in versus the very large, the Googles of the world, versus the smaller, the more enterprise-oriented people who need data centers, and in particular, as their international needs develop, where's your thinking going?
Well, it starts with the big service providers and content folks that you're talking about. They have different needs. For big power uses, they'll go to Eastern Washington or North Carolina, where they can get cheap power and very large footprint. But where you need to have high performance centers, I'll use AWS as an example. In two of our sites, you can directly connect to them in New York or in LA. And what that does is it improves the performance and gives you very secure connectivity needs right into their cloud. And so we're seeing those as kind of foundational. What happens is smaller users want to be next to that. They get better performance if they're nearby. So we see ourselves focused on application sensitive needs, those performance needs, and they need to be closer to end users and closer to these campuses. And you have a mix of applications, whether it's from big providers like AWS or smaller providers who want to connect to them.
Good. Maybe one last question. What do you think is going to be one of the 2 or 3 most important trends as we look forward to the next 3 or 5 years?
Well, I think basically when we talk to folks, we see, I think, a couple things. One is data center networking, putting data centers at the core, give the flexibility and the agility to choose providers and have the most options and manage your TCO. Second, you want to be near the cloud. You want to put the cloud at the center of your architecture. And the third question is, do you have the expertise? And there's a whole community and ecosystem of providers who you can leverage, who can manage it for you, manage you through this architectural shift. So very exciting time for the community, cloud and networking, and you see a lot of that here at PTC.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Take
Appreciate
care.
it.
Are you plugged into social media? Then join the conversation online. Follow PT Council on Twitter and use the PTC13 hashtag #PTC13. You can also like Pacific Telecommunications Council on Facebook.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And we go into the panel on policy changes and emerging, changing market. We have distinguished panelists this morning from around the world. Let me introduce Dean and Professor Jun Murai of Keio University, who's well known to us as the father of internet in Japan, but he's member of the used to be a member of the board of governors, board of directors of ICANN, Internet Corporations, on assigning names and numbers, and he's on the advisory board, Prime Minister's advisory board on ICT technology, and Mr. Howard Schmidt. To the right, who is a special assistant to the president at White House and a cybersecurity coordinator, who just issued last summer, the international strategy for cybersecurity. And Mr. Toru Nakaya has been a Japanese government representative to many international conferences, and now head of the Information Communication Policy Institute. Thank you all for joining us. And let me, before moving on to the rest of the panel, let me briefly ask a follow-up question to Mr. Johnson. And I think people are, in the audience are kind of interested in the WICET, World Conference on International Telecommunications, communications. So there has been a lot of written and said about WICET. And a lot of, I would say, questions or criticisms have been expressed by the media on ITU and its process of the conference. And could you kind of respond to that? Then also further comment is welcome. Could you?
Yeah, it was probably the one ITU conference that attracted most interest. As you say, there was a lot of hype in the lead up to the conference. But as I said, we had 151 countries very active in the negotiation. We had 1,600 delegates at the conference. And I believe that this has produced a much more representative and powerful treaty than the original treaty that was negotiated by a limited number of countries in 1988. But there were many divergent views, very strong views expressed on a number of issues, both in the preparation for the conference and at the conference itself. And a lot of emphasis was placed on the need to reach agreement by consensus. And because of that, many of the more radical proposals that were submitted to the conference were not included in the treaty. And I could mention, for example, routing regulation, differentiated pricing, equal rights for member states on internet governance, making ITU standards mandatory, and also proposal for an alternative dispute resolution for international connectivity matters, including the internet. And in fact, there is no mention anywhere in the treaty of the internet, which was, of course, one of the major concerns in the lead-up. But despite all the efforts to compromise, it's true that at the latter stages of the conference, there was one informal vote and one formal vote to agree on some texts for the treaty. And I think the emphasis here is that, you know, we strive for consensus, but you can only reach consensus if proponents are willing to compromise. And if there's a lack of willingness to compromise, then it can lead to frustration, and that can lead to member states calling for a conclusion by more formal means, such as voting, which is what happened towards the end. And then some questioned the number of countries that signed the treaty at the end. In ITU, normally you agree the final text and then you have less than 24 hours before the signing ceremony. So just before the end of concluding on the text, we had one of these formal votes which added a new sentence in the preamble on recognizing the right of member states to access international telecommunications. So this changed the situation for some countries. They might have signed, they needed more time to look at this. But we still had 89 countries signing the treaty within 24 hours of the final text. So I think that compares very well with many other conferences agreeing international treaties. And it was a similar situation in 1988. We didn't get so many countries signing immediately, but eventually we had 178 countries committed to the treaty. This treaty comes into force 1st of January 2015, so we hope very much that by then we'll have a lot more countries acceding to the treaty. As far as criticism about the preparatory process, we organized regional preparatory meetings throughout the world, and these were open to all interested parties. I personally attended the regional preparatory meetings for Asia Pacific, for Africa, Americas, Caribbean, Europe, the Arab states, and the Commonwealth of Independent States. And many member states organized national consultations, which are open and made available all the documents for the conference to the public. And the conference itself, we had wide participation of all stakeholders. Many were represented on national delegations. And we made the conference open to the public. The plenary sessions were all webcast in 6 UN languages. In fact, we had around 5 million people following the conference online. And we also had captioning. So every word that was spoken in the plenary was actually captioned, and the text was archived. So you can even refer back to what was said in the plenary sessions. It's still online. So I believe that it's not true to say that we don't have a very representative treaty, a very great improvement on the previous version, and it's something I think that we can help base the further development of connectivity throughout the world. One thing it's clearly done is to emphasize the difference of views that are developing around the world, different national views and regional views with regard to global communications, and certainly drawn public attention to that. There's no single worldwide view, but there are many developing, emerging views that will need to be taken into account in the future. So I think this is the start of a long dialogue. It's certainly not the end, and ITU will certainly pursue its mission to connect the world. Just before I finish, I'd just like to mention that we have a broadband commission which ITU and UNESCO established to help promote the rollout of broadband, high representatives of government, industry, and it produced a report last year on the status of broadband rollout. It's a very interesting report. It's available on the website, and we hope very much that this will help to generate both business interest and politicians' interest in rolling out broadband. It emphasizes, in fact, very much the need for political support at the highest level, and this will be presented at the UN General Assembly. So I encourage you to have a look at that report.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the answer. And I think the underlying question here on this debate is whether or not the ITU should be involving itself more deeply in internet issues. And I'd like to ask Dean Murai on this issue. And of course, a further comment on any internet policy is welcome. But Professor Murray, you've been, so to speak, a founding member of internet, and since I used to work in the internet field a little bit too, so I kind of presume that you have a very different prospect view on this. But could you kind of respond to the ongoing debate?
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm not having a very different view. I mean, I should say, because my background is, I've been involved on the internet since start of the development of it, and then so the first, of course, internet development was engineering, action, mainly from the academics, right? And therefore, the one of the characteristics about academics is boundaryless. It's global space by nature. Academics is always, the academic conference and everything is global. So then we were talking about the IP, Internet Protocol, which is basically the passing the digital bits around the world. So a very, very almost no concern about the national boundary, right, for the development of the internet. So naturally, the internet is the mother of the global space. That's a very important point. We still think that one. And then one day, the internet standard body, like ITF, was running with a DNS, domain name system, which is basically mapping the name to the IP address, right? And then one of the discussion raised that who's going to take this particular domain? Domain is a global space, and then taking one. And then somebody took mtb.com, and then another person said, no, MTB should belong to an MTB company, but it was originally not. And then there was a kind of debate and discussion started. And then I was picked as one of the representatives from the internet community to talk with the organization called the WIPO, one of the United Nations-based organization, right, to handle the intellectual property. And we had a kind of small group, and on the same table, we started the discussion. And then, so we said IP network, and they said IP is important. Their IP was intellectual property. Our IP was Internet Protocol. So we used a different language, right? Okay, so I still have a kind of a similar concern about what the internet is, what kind of internet we are talking about, right? Because the internet can be viewed as an IP network connecting the global space, which is the basics of a digital bit. And this is a very much a kind of engineering development and operation. But now, 20, 30 years passed, and that people started to use, and the society started to use the internet. And then there is a lot of impact on our life, our society, government, and everything. So now, when we are talking about the policy of the internet, then which internet are we talking about, right? Is there the definition of the internet before the discussion at ITU? That's the point, because from a people's point of view, there's diversity of understanding about the internet, right? Okay. So that we, for example, very original internet developer still thinks that this internet is an IP network, connected in IP network around the world. And then many people, users, think that the internet is application, right? And then the internet is a means of a communication, individual voice to be heard, and for democratic reasons, it's important. Now, both are true, but my point is how we can have a kind of a pre-definition of the term, and then go into discussion. So is that happening properly? That's one question. The second point of mine is when I was asking my 18 years students, right, the other day, that what do you think about the future of the internet? And then one of the students raised her hand, and she said, how long we still going to keep email on the internet? And then, we thought also it's kind of a strange question. And then I asked her, do you use email? And she said, no. She's a heavy user of the internet. She doesn't use email. And then, because the SNS and the other application can make her communication very well. And so her question was about, there was a lot of old application on the internet, like FTP, and then they don't know about FTP, file transfer protocol. And now they are starting to forget about email. Okay, that's fine. So evolution of the technology on top of the internet. Internet is a platform for the creativity, innovation, and the new thinking, new way of a solution of any problems of the human being. Okay, that's a basic digital technology's benefit and the purpose. So the human being can be very creative. So they are developing the new things always. So evolution is very fast. Okay, so my second question is, since internet, from the application point of view, it's changing every second, right? Okay, tomorrow, we will never know what kind of application we are using. And then what's kind of understanding about the internet? It's changing from the society's point of view and the people's point of view. So the question is, how can we catch up? From the discussion and decision-making process. Okay, in order to make a decision with a group, then what are we expecting? So it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years. How can we make a decision expecting the internet in 3 years future? So that's kind of, how can we make a decision thinking with the evolution, very rapid evolution of the technology. So that's a second point I'd like to raise.
We'll get back to you later, but since we are running short of time, can we go into a little bit different aspect of the internet? And Torun might have something to say on this, like cybersecurity issue, but I don't want to skip you, but you have ample time in the afternoon. So, but anyway, you worked on the internet governance discussion, and at the APT you drafted the cybersecurity sort of related sentences, and so you might want to say something, but if we have time, I'll give you time. Later on. Mr. Schmidt, you've been sort of the head of the cybersecurity policy at the White House, and you issued the international strategy for cybersecurity of the United States government. And I understand the telecommunication is a sort of declared sort of critical infrastructure, as you may say. And so let me ask you, why is that, and what that means to the international community? And also, in this conference, I think the audience are interested in the implication, any implication of the IP-based, the conversion of IP-based network and old telco system on the cybersecurity. And could you kindly respond to that?
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here with my distinguished colleagues, and not only from the universities, but the ministry and ITU. I know Dr. Toure, the Secretary General of ITU, and I have had a number of discussions about the world as we see it today, the traditional telecom that I think the treaty that Malcolm had mentioned had evolved from, and what it means in today's world. But it's interesting to the two specific questions you asked. The first on identifying telecommunications as critical infrastructure. I think when we looked at the evolution of just point-to-point wires, and then we went to the SS7 system, and we started using satellites, undersea cables, oftentimes they seem to be owned by companies or governments or some combination of the two. But the difference in the internet today is, as you had mentioned quite eloquently, is we all depend on it. I mean, even preparing backstage here, the last minute I'm on my iPad, checking email, communicating. Of course, in the U.S., it's 2 two important events were taking place. The president's being inaugurated. We have a national holiday. So as a consequence, everything that we do is tied into this. And I remember in the early days of the internet, I think when I first got in, there were about 11,000 of us that were on there. And by today's standards, it's a very, very small part of the internet. But back then, we thought it was large. One of the things when we start talking about critical infrastructure, and really what it means is, think of what your life would be. In some cases, it'd be better. But if a day without the internet, and think about the first hour, which seems good. I don't have to do email. I'm not doing all these other things that seem to be distractions. By the end of the day, we find out, in many cases, we can't even purchase something at a grocery store. We can't communicate with loved ones, particularly using voice over IP. So when the president, when I started appointed in December of 2009, the president said, what are the really critical things we need to worry about? Energy sector, of course, is one of the answers we gave. The international financial system, we all know, is very critical. But the telecommunications infrastructure has a unique position. Because not only is the mechanism by which that we achieve all the wonderful things that telecommunications and the associated IP-based activity that takes place over it or with it, but it also is that same mechanism by which a lot of the bad things happen. And when we start looking at cybersecurity in the telecommunications infrastructure of the 21st century, we should never and we can never be looking to building out the next generation, whether it's 5G, 6G, whether it's voice over IP, whatever the technology must be, we can't build it just because we have a small group of people that effectively control it, because we all own and operate it now. And I think that's one of the difference in when Malcolm was talking about the ITU and the discussion, is this is no longer something that is government's control. My computers, every one that I have here and every one's at my home, they are part of the infrastructure, so therefore we depend on it. The other thing, very briefly, on the convergence, and this becomes a challenge, whether it's from a taxation, and I hate using that word, or if it's a revenue, whether it's a tariff perspective, there are things that take place on an IP network that seem to be somewhat unique. But I don't think they could take place without the fundamental telecommunications infrastructure to support it. As we move into some of the new satellite systems that are almost strictly IP-based, we'll see some of that changing. But right now, it's hard to tell when you pick up a mobile phone where you're in the IP world and when you're in the telecommunications world, when one starts and one ends. So as a consequence, in the thing that I care about most, and I'm a technologist, so I love the technology, but how do we secure it? It's how to secure something you have very little control over, and we should not have control over. I think we're very happy with the multi-stakeholder governance mechanism that has got us to where we are today. But how do we make that more secure by engaging people without overbearing anyone with regulations that also times, in many cases, I think inhibit innovation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And any sort of further response to cybersecurity issue from other panelists on the international cooperation or anything? Or if not, okay. So, Toru, you got time. So, before questions and answers, I give you 2 minutes, then you can say anything.
Yeah.
But he's got ample time for presentation in the afternoon. So
thank you, Mr. Sakamaki. Well, actually, the point Mr. Schmidt said at the end is really important. Well, actually, multi-stakeholder approach is now becoming essential for considering protection and cybersecurity in particular. We have to involve a lot of stakeholders. Otherwise, we can't implement the measures to protect something or to secure something. And even in the ITU conference, in particular, Wicked, he made a great effort to involve many stakeholders so that we can reach a consensus which can be truly implementable. And actually, the involvement of multi-stakeholder is really important from the outset, not only the implementation stage, but also the policy-making stage. Without having their views, we can't reach on the pragmatic or practical measures which can be implemented promptly or in a timely manner. So I do believe the multi-stakeholder approach should be now in common for everything around the internet. Thank you.
Is that it? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Now we have some time for questions from the audience, but if there's any question to the panelists, please raise your hand, please. It's hard to... Sir, yeah, please. Microphone will be, I think, to...
This question is for Mr. Johnson. Traditionally, it's a long cycle, the process from identification of a need for a standard and publishing of the standard. How and to what extent has the use of information and communication technology helped speed up the whole process? Can you give some benchmark results from they were using the technology today?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, the processes in ITU are very different now to what they were just a few years ago. I mean, all our meetings are paperless. Every delegate has a laptop. And the approval process is also much quicker than before. So we can produce a standard very, very quickly now. I mean, let's take the example of the universal mobile phone charger. This is a standard I think everybody welcomed because it actually specifies the end connector to the mobile, the micro USB. And all the major vendors signed up to this standard before it was adopted. And it also reduces the energy consumption because it doesn't use any energy when it's offload, which has been calculated to save 13.6 million tons of CO2 because you multiply a charger by 6 billion. It's a lot of energy. So that was proposed, I recall, in July of 2010, I believe it was. And that standard was first consented, as we call it, first step of approval in ITU in September the same year. And then it was finally approved in the following February. So it shows you can move very, very fast. Obviously, if it's a more complicated standard, it's going to take longer. But the process in ITU is that it's our private sector that drives the standards, of course. 95% of our recommendations, as we call them, are developed and approved by the industry members, and we have a separate approval process for that, so that when there's consensus on the standard in the study group, and the chairman determines whether it's consensus or not, doesn't mean unanimity, but once there's consensus on that standard, it's consented, it goes on our website, and then if there are no comments within a 4-week period, it's been approved. And when it's been approved by 193 governments. So it's a very nice combination of private sector and governments. So the process can be very fast, and people that haven't been to ITU for many years, they still think of it as it used to be, quite slow. But now it's one of the fastest, and in fact for approval, it's the fastest approval mechanism we have. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. One more quick question, and as she's saying that we have 2 more minutes. Excuse me. Yeah, sir. No, ma'am, please. Yeah. You can. I mean, okay then, sir.
Right, Tricia Paoletta with Wilshire and Granis. From press reports, one of the reasons why the U.S. did not sign the treaty was, in part, cybersecurity being proposed to be included in it by some other countries. And ITUT is doing work in cyber, so I'm wondering from your perspective, why wasn't that work considered sufficient? Why did other countries want to bring cyber into the ITRs? And from Mr. Schmidt's perspective, since you were responsible for U.S. cyber, did you feel there's a lack of, or did you look to the ITU work in terms of cyber, or was what the U.S. was doing for its own networks, considered sufficient? Thank you.
Quick answer, please.
Perhaps I'll just mention what actually happened,
Please,
and then
yes.
Howard can say whether it was a good thing or not. But yeah, there is an article there which calls for member states basically to cooperate together to ensure the security and robustness of the international telecoms system network. So that was the conclusion. The cyber security is not mentioned. It's security and robustness of the network, and the need for member states to collaborate together to ensure that. That was the outcome.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a wonderful question, and thanks for that, because before I retired, one of the big discussions we had about what's going to happen in WICET, and more broadly, what's going to happen in ITU in the future. I think there's a couple key points that are vitally important. To emphasize once again, the multi-stakeholder approach didn't seem to be part of the discussion going into a lot of the workup for the WICET. The second piece of it, when you start looking at what other nations were doing, it's difficult to come up with, number one, move ITU from a straight telecommunications body into an internet IP-based environment, which is sort of outside the lane, I think many of us believe. But secondly, some of the nations, even the discussions we had, they were not given the capability of making sure we had openness, innovation, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, those fundamental rights that are covered under by many of the treaties that currently exist. They didn't seem to exist there. And the motivations where you start looking at governments controlling the internet is just something that I think we're very much opposed to. I think many of us of the internet age are opposed to, and having it sort of being put in at a well-working body like ITU is just something that we felt was untenable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we ran out of time. So for further questions, please come to the afternoon session. Mr. Johnson offered to be in the audience. So thank you so much, and please join me applaud the distinguished panel. Thank you.
PTC 13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC 13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC 13 Gold sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. During PTC 13, the PTC Secretariat will be located in Sea Pearl 3 on the 6th floor of the Mid-Pacific Conference Center at the Hilton Hawaiian Village Waikiki Beach Resort. If you need assistance from a member of the Secretariat, please visit Sea Pearl 3. PTC 13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC 13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC 13 Silver sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
Just to get started, what I'd like to do is ask each of you to give us 4 or 5 minutes on your company's involvement in providing services to content providers, or if you're Kara, I want you to throw a bomb.
All right.
Okay?
Sounds good.
Ishikawa-san, do you want to go first?
I'm Ishikawa from MMBI, Tokyo, Japan. So our company is a mobile broadcasting company. It sounds like old-fashioned business, but I'd like to introduce some part. And this is the main shareholder is NTT Docomo. So they have a strategy to be total service providers. So the investment to a company is one of the elements of that kind of things. And we adopt ISDBT, that is the ITU standard. And the normal broadcasting, in addition to the normal broadcasting streaming services, we provide storage type services. So every morning you can have the electronic newspapers every morning. And right now, so the average is 1 gigabyte of the files, video, audio, and newspapers, magazines, such kind of things. You can get 1 gigabyte every day. So it's a good functionality and also for the mobile receiving condition is not stable. So the ISDBT have some functionality to the combination of the broadcasting networks and the telecom networks. So most of the part is transmitted through the broadcasting networks, but the 100% delivery is impossible for everyone. So the missing part is automatically received from using the telecom networks. And in the morning you wake up, you can watch or you can use your newspapers anytime, anywhere. So that is one part of our services. So we start this service last April. In this 9 months, so we get over 500,000 subscribers right now. But our target subscriber number in this end of March is 1 million. Oh, it's a big number. But these kind of things is one of the example of the network collaboration or cooperation. So because especially for the mobile telecom networks, the price is not free, and so there is no flat rate in real sense. So there is some limitation of the usage in accordance with the storage volume. So in the sense, so using the broadcasting network is very economical sense. It's a good way. So probably this is the old-fashioned to make it reborn, to give new functionalities. And also, we will not like, we don't want to be a dumb pipe. So we are the broadcasting companies, so we make our own programs, and not the existing ordinary programs. So we combine the communication functionality and also the storage type and real-time services. And also using the social networks, we want to make it to a new format of the programs right now. So we are trying several types of programs right now. So one of the examples is the customer or the user join the planning, the program planning meetings using the Google+. So, but in the real program is shooted by the professional. The quality is so high, but the customer has a feeling of participate the kind of things. And also, our main device is a smartphone. So it already has communication networks. So, for example, it's very easy case. So the quiz shows. So only the MC is on the TV screen. All the audience is the participant. So that is one of the examples. So anyway, so we want to create a new lifestyle of this kind of services. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, Mike, you're from my hometown, and you've been in this business for a very long time. Originally, we're spun out from Time Warner, so you probably have a little bit more understanding of content folks and what they might be looking for. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a little bit about TW Telecom. We're a business communications provider across the United States and in Hawaii here. And you know, it's interesting, you mentioned as we've seen this evolve over the years, I think we're in a fundamental shift in the way that people are addressing how they're delivering applications and content, and not just to the consumer, but also to the business customer. There's a wide range of applications that the business consumers are looking to, and you know, so much talk about cloud and those kinds of capabilities. But I think the fundamental shift we're seeing is in the network. The network's capabilities to adapt to meet the demands of those content providers and those people delivering those solutions, whether it be a consumer-oriented application or a business-oriented application. I think we're in this transition. We refer to it as Telco 2.0, where you're looking at how we can provision services, how you deliver capabilities, how you deliver scale, and it's fundamentally changing from the nailed-up point-to-point sort of infrastructure we've had in the past to a more on-demand, consume what you need, pay for what you use sort of approach. And it's interesting to see that we're moving from these circuits that we used to build to a notion of services that we're delivering to customers, that they can integrate capabilities and new applications across a service delivery platform as opposed to just point-to-point sorts of circuits, right? That we're migrating away from technologies that are traditional telco TDM, T1s, DS3s, E1s, et cetera, to Ethernet and much more scalability, that it plugs into what customers already have today. And we're seeing that you can automate the provisioning process so that you can give scalability on demand. And I think about where people are building these content delivery sorts of networks, and even using a mobile environment where you need to be able to push lots of capacity in a very short period of time. I think about, you know, just at a sporting event. Here's where you have now demands on the network and consumers that just show up in one place quickly for a brief period of time. You need to have flexibility around the way we deliver the network, right? So what we've done is tried to focus on how we can enable those applications, connect to the content providers directly, and give customers a wide range of on-demand access so they can literally see what's going on in the network in real time so they can prioritize and make business decisions about applications and where they're going to manage them. We can give customers bandwidth on demand so they can literally double or triple the capacity that they consume in real time without taking them out of service. And when they're done with that, it goes back to the way it was. So they don't have to over-provision infrastructure. And I think what we need to do is look at how we're delivering a more intelligent network, not the big dumb pipes, right? That we're migrating away from that, and that it's not a brute force sort of strategy around how you deliver applications across these networks these days. We have to give the flexibility to the customer so that they can expand capacity, rearrange and prioritize the network resources available so that they can better manage the experience that they're trying to deliver, that user experience in a more comprehensive way, that it's not just brute force with big dumb pipes. It's an interesting time to be in this industry because of the transition we're seeing, and it's going to keep going.
As Kara said last year, some of you in this industry may want to just, go away, lay down, and die.
Yeah.
which no one asked you to follow up on.
Sure.
And go ahead and make whatever comments you want, but if you want to take that train and run with it.
I don't want you to die, really, literally, but actually I do. I think the point I was making was when we're talking about networks, I always start with the consumer because there was a really smart Disney executive a couple of years ago who said consumers have taken control of the situation and they're not planning on giving it back any longer. And I think one of the things that I find it difficult when I'm talking to either Hollywood or network providers or anywhere along this particular food chain of what a network is, and it can be different. Network is different for everything, but for all intents and purposes, the network doesn't exist anymore to consumers. They don't think of it that way. They don't conceive of it that way. They don't live that way because of the, especially in the last 2 years, because of two things: the huge growth of smartphones, which they use very liberally and adeptly, and especially younger people, and the huge growth of tablets. This year, tablets are going to surpass PCs and laptops in terms of sales. And it's not going back. And these are consumers making these choices. And so if anyone who has children, I mean, I'm going to go on a very simple level. Anyone who has children knows there is no such thing as a network for children. My children, the network for my children is Apple TV, Roku, Comcast On Demand, and things they pull down off of YouTube. They create their own networks. And so you have to start, even though that's a very simple concept, you have to start from where the consumer is and how they are assembling their networks. Everything else doesn't matter. Whatever you present to them doesn't matter. They want to have it available to them at a cost that's not prohibitive in terms of killing it off, killing off the demand that's there. And thirdly, in a way that they don't have to think about it in a very seamless fashion, that they don't have to think about where and how they're going to get it from. And unfortunately, a lot of the businesses are trying to preserve their old business models and how they present things to people, instead of thinking about how they themselves might use it and how their own children or their own family uses it. So one of the things I always tend to do is start with the consumer, because they're so in control of everything, including to business customers. Businesses are now getting their clues from what consumers are doing, because people go home and have a certain experience and they want the same experience when they're in businesses. And so I always look to exactly what the consumers are doing, and I see 4 things they're doing. They share. They share all over the place, and that's of course the larger social thing that's happening, which means that's how they discover programming, that's how they discover their needs and therefore their demands from the network. 2, and that's a huge deal. It's not just Facebook. I mean, social is not just Facebook. It's the concept of sharing everything, Instagram or video or text or articles or Twitter, wherever they share like massively. And so that and then that creates the way demand is pulled, and therefore you can't imagine what it's going to be, because you don't know how people are going to share and what they're going to share.
It's all pull.
It's all pull.
Very little push.
Yes, exactly. It can be push, but marketing is very difficult in this environment to this customer. They find things in different ways. Besides social, the second one thing is obviously mobile. Mobile is the biggest and most important trend of the next 10 years.
And is mobile the most important trend because it's going to increase the amount of on-demand viewing that occurs?
Because that's how people behave now. The phone is your best friend. I mean, it's like unfortunately, the geeks were right with Star Trek. This is the communicator. This does everything. And so you have to think about, it's a mini computer. This is more powerful than the computer. I'm old as hell, but this is more powerful than the computer I had in college. It does more things. It's an astonishing device. And of course, in a tablet format, in the 7-inch tablet format, people like that, like the Nexus 7 or the mini iPad. It's a very powerful device. So mobile is the most critical element of the whole thing. Local is the third one, is that you can that you can use it in a local format and rather quickly, kind of thing. And the last one is robustness and cost of what you get, the speed and and how much it costs to pull it down. And so you're not mucking around with your telco or your Comcast or whoever and paying exorbitant amounts of money and confused by the whole thing. So that you create a situation that's very easy for consumers to understand the value proposition of what they're doing and not worrying about their kids pulling down. I spend a lot of time worrying about my children and in YouTube videos constantly about because they have a mini iPad. And then the last thing I think that's critically important to think about is how it's presented to you in terms of software that is usable and easy to use. Now, Apple's been fantastic on this, not so much with the internet software. Their internet software is abysmal compared to their devices. That it's easy to use. Some of the companies like Comcast has a very nice Xfinity app, which I don't use, but it's nice because I use Apple TV. But it's you've got to figure out. There's too many of these apps and how you access this stuff, and so it's going to be really interesting to see who dominates in how you access this stuff, or where the grid, or where the remote control of the future is going to be in terms of pulling down these things. So I think very few people have done a good job in this area. Apple TV is flawed. Roku is flawed. They're all flawed in some fashion, but there's certainly the beginnings pointing the way it's going to be of how people pull down their information from the cloud or wherever they get it from.
You know, so we've already heard now, Ishikawa-san solves the problem of bandwidth by using the broadcast network, which if you think about it, if you've done any engineering, you know it's really an efficient way to deliver content. Now, I'm assuming you've got some way to store locally, because that's the other part of how you keep the on-demand, personalized feature while using basically a broadcasting method. Mike's talked about networks that have to be more flexible, and Kara's basically saying there's no such thing as a network. People are going to assemble what they want using any pipes that they've got available to them. And
but I
the
will
apps
say
that
they
they've
can be
got available.
helped. I mean, I think they can be helped doing
Right.
that. But
Right.
they're sort of out there. It's almost like raised by wolves right now. Everybody's grabbing for what they want.
And of course, Barry from Comcast, who's going next, works for a company that both owns content, delivers content, and uses both a linear and an on-demand format. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, we definitely sit at the intersection of how media and content are redefining network. We have to think about that every day as being the largest North American MSO and also being on the forefront of how changes in applications and changes in consumer behavior, as Kara touched on, are going to affect the way TV and media are consumed in the future. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how that directly affects our national networks and metro networks and networks in the home, and even the way Wi-Fi has to work with all the proliferation of tablets and smartphones that are now used in the home, and how consumers want a seamless experience, whether it's on their set-top or whether they're traveling to work or sitting at their desk or traveling on business. So it is a challenging time, but we're in a great position to bring these technologies together. And it's great to join you at PTC again. I'm in the wholesale business, so part of my role is to also work with third parties, media companies, content delivery networks, to give them an experience on Comcast to help. One of our businesses, for example, is linear TV distribution, origination of channels, and transport of broadcast signals in the linear world, and we're working with them to digitize and bring a lot more of their bring a lot of the delivery over IP. And you look at how we use content delivery networks to accelerate delivery, not just in a linear sense, but also digital. So it's a very interesting time. It's very exciting. I think we're still in the first quarter of this evolution, but it's getting closer and closer to halftime. And ultimately there'll be some winners and losers in this game.
49ers.
Yeah. Well, they played amazing yesterday.
They're going to win.
Yeah. Well, I like that prediction.
Win everything in San Francisco now.
Good.
Yes, I have one sort of, and it's possibly an unanswerable question at this point, and please, our peers in the audience may have thoughts about this. One of the things that concerns me, and it should never concern the consumer, because consumers don't care how we get the stuff to them, and nor should they. It's not their problem. But if you're in the tubes business, you've got to worry about how much it costs you to deliver the gigabytes that people really want, and we've got to deliver them. If it's content, it's got to be pretty cheap, because I, as a consumer, will not pay you more than what Comcast charges me for my video service, and I can do the math and figure how many programs, how many channels, how many hours per day, what does that cost me per hour, and that's the price that I'm willing to pay for on-demand content, and yet there's a real cost to these networks. And I worry sometimes that we've got a sort of mismatch between the cost of video being delivered to an end user for a low price versus the amount of bandwidth we require for messaging and voice and other applications that, for me as a consumer, are equally important, right? And I don't know if you guys have got thoughts about how to do that, except Ishikawa, of course, has an advantage here.
Oh, yes. So we make the broadcasting networks from scratch. So the cost is so enormous. And I forgot so our services are paid services. So 420, and it's about $5 per month subscription fees. So our business model is, so we must get 5 million subscribers. So it's a big, it's very difficult, but for the communication services, so before going to that, so there are many previous mobile TV services in the United States and in Europe. But I think there is no successful business model right now. So we will not, we will avoid their track. So because one is the price range, so it's $10 to $15 per month or something like that. It's like pay TV channels, but we shift to our service. The cost fee wise is like application services. It's $3 to $5 is probably the same. So we will make use of the volume. We want to make the volume of the business. So that is our key. So infrastructure's cost is very high.
Yeah, and of course you have the advantage of you're essentially multicasting, which, man, if you're going to do...
Not
multicasting.
Oh, it's really broadcasting.
Yeah. Well, I use multicasting to mean point to multipoint.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, what's interesting is we haven't had a discussion of what's of value, right? Where is the value? To a consumer, I agree they shouldn't have to stop and think about all the parts along the way of the network, but if their user experience is lacking, right, they could have the best application in the world, but if my network doesn't work, if the servers are congested, if I don't have a great experience along the way, it's not going to go anywhere, right? And so there is somebody in the middle that is thinking about how do we prioritize, how do we manage these resources, how do you build it in a better way, and, you know, cost is a big component, right? So bandwidth isn't free. It's getting cheaper, right, because of the scale, but somebody is planning and doing all that work along the way so that there is a good user experience. Mm-hmm. Without that user experience, the best of applications are going to fail.
I think by user experience, I mean, is it doesn't hang and it doesn't work. I think that's where most people have the problem with the user experience, is that they're sitting there trying to, like today I was trying to watch a video of a new Tiger Woods video. It was just a simple YouTube video, and it hung and it hung and it hung, and that's, for most consumers, that's the bad user experience. Right. It's not necessarily getting away from how many applications are, how many confusing applications they are. I think the biggest thing is that it doesn't work, that you can't get it. And it's not an experience you have with broadcast television. It's not an experience you have with your car most of the time. And so I think what's going to happen is, how do you solve that for consumers in a way where someone else isn't going to come in and take advantage of it? What Google's doing in fiber, what do you think they're there for? Because they understand it's an opportunity to start to serve customers in a different way. And I think if a lot of these companies get sort of caught up in their knitting, they're not going to understand that it's, you know, they're in the now right now and not realizing that figuring out a way to serve consumers at the lowest cost and not having these hang-up problems is really the focus. Right. They seem to be arguing about today versus where it's going.
But Barry, Google Fiber, we have to address it.
Yeah, well, I think to the point of 1,600 tech-hungry folks descending on the Hilton all at once definitely clogged up the enterprise network, and I think we all felt that this morning at the hotel. But you know, over time, I think people, you know, the trend, as mentioned, is going to be more devices, more tablets, more ways to consume content, and being able to provision and deliver is going to be critical. So we see, you know, Google Fiber is a viable competitor. They're out there, and consumers are going to want ways of consuming their applications on a larger and larger pipe that they can then choose to provision, you know, many devices on and enable many applications from.
And I think Google Fiber is part of a larger, I don't mean to say Google's a very frightening company, but they are indeed a frightening company. The purchase of Motorola, it all goes together. It's all part of it. They own the device, they're going to own the software applications, they're going to own the fiber. So they'll have the, you know, and I don't know if you just saw that recent interview with Larry Page. I mean, he's a very ambitious person. And he, besides making their hovercrafts and their time machines that they're also doing off to the side, they're very much thinking of a million-person company. I mean, that's their mindset. And so you have to think about how it all fits together. They're not just talking about the fiber delivery, they're talking about the phone delivery, and they're talking about the software delivery, and they're talking about the entire stretch. And then, of course, they're thinking about getting the entertainment on it. So it's and so in that regard, their competitor is Apple, which thinks less about the delivery, the bandwidth delivery, and more about the devices. But I think very powerful companies are going to have pieces of each of them along the way.
Okay, and since I've gotten the "we're out of time" message, I'll try to summarize if I can, and simply say that all of you have basically said people who do bandwidth delivery have to be cognizant of experience now. End user experience is the business you're really in. And really, frankly, how you get the cost parameters in line is totally up to you. But experience is really the product we've got to sell, not the bandwidth. So, thanks very much, folks, for listening.
Thank you.
Cloud services present some interesting and unique challenges to both cloud and network service providers. Today, the vast majority of cloud workloads are delivered over the public internet, and while that's appropriate for certain types of work, such as test and dev, it does not meet the security or the performance requirements for most corporate IT users. On the network side, it also tends to be the lowest margin product that a network delivers. In order to deliver the sorts of security and performance requirements that they need, what you need to do is attach the private WAN environment to the public or private cloud environment sitting in the data center. This has a dual benefit. It meets the corporate requirements as well as allowing the network service provider to sell a higher margin product. To that end, what we've seen are private NNIs being set up between network service providers, both parties joining things such as our Ethernet exchange in order to efficiently aggregate access to one another, as well as joining our Internet exchange in order to have access to the optimal Internet routes for those workloads appropriate for the Internet environment.
Hello, I'm Richard Taylor, and I am President and Chair of the Board of Governors of the Pacific Telecommunications Council. And with me is Tetsuo Yamakawa, who is the Chairman of the PTC Japan Committee and former Vice Minister for Policy Coordination of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications of Japan. Greetings, Mr. Yamakawa. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, and we're going to have a conversation about PTC and Japan, and I guess we'll start by saying, we had a really great sort of mid-year session in Japan last year, and I was wondering what PTCJ's plans are to follow up on that.
Oh, thank you very much. The mid-year forum in Tokyo was very successful last year, and though the Asia-Pacific region is very important, the activity of PTC Japan is not so popular in Japan, but it provides a very good chance for Japanese industries to aware what is happening in this region. And our next goal is to promote the investment of Japanese industry to this region, because Asia-Pacific region is very important. It's a driver for the growth of economy all over the world. So, for example, the Asian countries had introduced a very challenging plan, that is ASEAN Connectivity Plan, that is to combine, to network each of the Asian countries by fiber optic cables. And they need the international cooperation, and we are very eager to cooperate. And PTC Japan will be to facilitate the investment and the exchange of views in this region.
Chairman Yamakawa, you bring to PTCJ a wealth of experience in government and policy. I was wondering what you think is the most important issue right now sort of facing Japan in that area.
Well, Japan has experienced the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. And Japan is now facing a challenge not to recover from the damage simply, but to create a new nation that is resistant to natural disasters with social and economic durability. For example, we need transformation of a society. For example, in the occurrence of a tsunami, some local government has stored their very important data in the paper basis. For example, residential data, medical data, and educational data, and so on. And with the tsunami, well, they all washed away, and they lost their important data. But some local governments use the service of cloud service. For example, so their data, the important data was stored 100 kilometers distance from the hardest hit areas. So their important data was saved. That was very important. We need to create a new nation resistant to these natural disasters by using ICT.
I think this is a short interview, but I think we have time for one more question. I mean, Japan is so advanced already in its telecommunications infrastructure. What's next? Where do you go from here?
Well, as you know, we have fiber optic cables network all over the world. Almost the penetration rate is 100. But usage is not enough. So, Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications has stated a next stage strategy, what we call the Active Japan strategy. The very most important factors of the strategy is active life strategy. That is to enable all generations to actively participate in society. For example, we create a new city. It's a smart city operated by ICT. And for example, robots to support the older people's life. And for example, to save energy and so on. So that is in order to make the best usage of ICT and to create a new nation.
Well, that's very exciting. I hope to get to Japan and see that develop myself. I think, though, that we'll have to stop there for now. But again, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
The keynotes, executive inside roundtables, and topical sessions continue on Tuesday. And ladies, you're invited to attend the PTC Women's Breakfast sponsored by Paul Hastings. All full conference delegates and delegates holding a one-day registration pass for Tuesday are then invited to attend the Tuesday evening reception sponsored by the PTC 13 Diamond sponsor, Tata Communications. Please remember to bring your official PTC 13 badge to be admitted to the event. PTC 13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC 13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC 13 bronze sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
As a wholesale telecom carrier, you need to keep a tight control on costs without ever sacrificing quality. Introducing RimHub, the best partner to outsource your wholesale carrier functions with guaranteed cost savings and better customer experience. RimHub is guided by K. Paul Singh, co-founder, ex-chairman, and CEO of Primus Telecom, who built a profitable global wholesale business at Primus. RimHub's best-in-class service portfolio includes managed network provisioning, and cost of sales management. Our NOC, staffed with IP and TDM engineers, monitors and troubleshoots network issues for global carriers. Our network specialists are experts in provisioning voice and data circuits for carriers. Our telco auditors ensure you pay only for what you contracted. So why use RimHub? Achieve material cost savings, enhance operational flexibility, deliver a better customer experience. Contact us for a no-obligation assessment today, plus win an iPad mini.
Looking for in-depth coverage of the day's sessions? Read the Comms Day Daily, brought to you by Comms Day, the official PTC 13 media partner. The special PTC 13 edition of the Comms Day Daily will be delivered to your email inbox tonight. The daily will also be available on the PTC 13 website at ptc.org/PTC 13. Thanks for watching PTC TV. Be sure to join us tomorrow. Until then, aloha.